it was tough to, in spite of the wonderful setup that Diffie and Hellman had made and the technology that seemed to work, it was tough to see how to make the transition to practice. Computers were very slow then. I mean, if you think about a VAX back in the day, trying to find a large prime number, it really took quite a long time, many minutes, maybe half an hour in some cases, depending on how big the prime was. And so the practical aspects of this were daunting at the time.
Even with the CPUs of the late 80s, you would have needed a dedicated chip to do the encryption,
Not necessarily.
Right?
You could do so. Well, I mean, the encryption is basically a singular modular exponentiation, and so that's whatever it took. It might have been a minute or something like that. Keys, finding the keys and so on was a longer operation to finding the prime numbers and so on. But that only needs to be done once, so that was not so much of an issue. But computational efficiency, I mean, it's amazing how much faster computers have gotten since those days.
Yes, indeed.
Look at what you can do in your laptop now and what was possible back then. So now encryption is public key encryption is doable. It's blazingly fast in a tiny fraction of a second. We started off with the idea, and then MIT decided to file for a patent. So they said, this looks like it might have practical application. And I'm not quite sure how they made that assessment, but they just said, yeah, this looks interesting enough to file a patent for. And so there was a patent filed, and that wasn't granted until 1983 or something like that. There was some interference with the Stanford patents on their work and too that took a little while to resolve, but that got sorted out eventually. And then in about 83, we decided that this looked like it was commercially viable. We weren't quite sure how, and we didn't know much about business, but we decided to set up a company to explore that. And so we did. We created RSA Data Security, and Len was the first president of the company. Even though he, like us, Adi and I, knew nothing about business really. And we started to explore applications. And the first thing that we had in mind there was secure phones. So that was not a market which we knew a whole lot about, but we said we could make this work. And so it involves some encoding and decoding of voice with a crypto and so on too. And that turned out not to be where the market really was. That didn't work. We had some difficulty with a supplier of the chips that we wanted to make. They were sort of based on the original RSA chip we did. So the chip fabrication route didn't work. But as that was happening, the whole world of general purpose computing and software was taking off too. We weren't quite to the era of the web yet, but the internet was starting to take off, and the idea of encrypting products, encrypting messages on the internet started to seem more and more real. So in '86, the company about went bust. We weren't making any money. We got Jim Bidzos to take over the company, and we changed the management structure. And he was a really great, insightful, and smart businessman who had a lot of technical depth and understood how to close a deal, and started talking with companies that might do it. I think one of the early licensees was IBM on Lotus Notes.
And MIT was okay with the idea of having these three professors go off and at least part-time be working at this company as well? Or
MIT has always been very favorably disposed towards entrepreneurial activities on the part of its faculty. I mean, it's a clear line to say, your primary obligation is to MIT, but if you're doing, some amount of time on the side doing this. And it really didn't take a lot of time at the early days because there wasn't much happening at first. There was no market really quite, so it was trying to figure out what to do. But MIT does have policies of supporting entrepreneurial activities on the part of the faculty. Faculty typically take time off and go off and do a startup or something like that for a year or two. Usually not more. I think more than 2 is not allowed, but up to 2 years. So, in fact, I didn't take any time off to work on this. It was lightweight enough in the early days that it wasn't necessary, and after that we had a good team at the company itself. I remain involved as a consultant and advisor, board member, for a long time, and sort of tried to work with mostly with Jim Bidzos, who was running the company at the time, until the company was sold in '96. So it was involved with the various aspects of licensing and working with various customers and working on the technology, trying to make it better. If you have good people, I mean, working with good people is always a lot of fun. And if the market's just taking off, that's a lot of fun. There were no real competitors from a business sense. But there wasn't much of a market either, so there wasn't much to compete over yet. It was market creation, if anything. That was the most important part of this, is trying to explain to people what this technology can do and how they could use it and develop a demand for it.